Claire, wait. Please don't go.
I must. It's our way.
Will you come back?
I always do.
7 years of questions. What have we become? I don't know if I can trust this love anymore.
7 years. He had been counting without meaning to filing the dates the way the mind files recurring anomalies that it hasn't yet decided what to do with. Every year in the week before Valentine's Day, his wife Claire became quieter, not distant. She was still present, still warm, still the person he had married. But there was a quality of inward attention that arrived every February like weather that she managed and that he had learned not to push on because pushing on it produced nothing he could use. And every Valentine's Day itself, she was gone, not all day, the afternoon and the evening and sometimes into the early morning. She had explanations that were always slightly different and always technically sufficient. A friend who needed her, a personal commitment she couldn't move, something she had promised to do before he was in her life. He had believed all of the explanations. He had also stopped believing them, not simultaneously. Gradually, over 7 years, the two things had coexisted, the belief and the disbelief, in the specific uncomfortable way that things coexist when you love someone and have not yet decided what to do with the thing you're beginning to suspect. This year, he had decided. He had followed her. Not physically, he had been smarter than that. He had noticed 3 years ago that she always left on foot and returned by taxi, and that the taxi receipts that occasionally appeared in her coat pockets named the same hotel each time. The Harland, downtown, a place they had never been to together. In January, while Claire was at work, he had called the Harland and booked a room. Not the room she booked, the room next door. He checked in on February 14th at 3 in the afternoon. He lay on the bed in room 412 and he waited. And what he heard, through the wall, through the adjoining door that was not quite as soundproof as the hotel's website implied, was not what he had prepared himself to hear. It was something that was going to require him to rebuild everything he thought he understood about the woman he had married, and everything he thought he understood about what love costs. Please like this video. Those likes are what make stories like this reach people. Subscribe too, it's free. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let me take you back to where this started.
Daniel Walsh was 42 years old and had been married to Claire for 8 years. He was the kind of husband who remembered things, not performatively, not as a strategy, but because he paid attention in the specific way of someone who had decided early that the people he loved deserved his genuine attention rather than the managed approximation of it. He remembered how Claire took her coffee. He remembered the name of the colleague who had been difficult to her 6 months ago and asked, occasionally, how that situation had resolved. He remembered that she preferred the window seat on planes and always fell asleep within 20 minutes and woke up embarrassed about it, and he had never once pointed this out. He was not a perfect husband. He worked too late and sometimes forgot to say the things that needed saying until the moment for them had passed, and he had a habit of solving problems before he had checked whether the problem needed solving or just needed acknowledging, but he was present, he was honest, he was, in the foundational sense of the word, there. He had noticed the February pattern in year 1 and had said nothing, because 1 year is not a pattern. He had noticed it in year 2 and had gently asked, and Claire had given him the explanation. A friend who needed her, a personal commitment, the explanation was enough, and he had accepted it. By year 4, he had stopped asking. By year 6, the not asking had become its own weight. Claire Walsh was 40 years old and had been carrying something for 13 years, not since she met Daniel. Before Daniel. Before the life she now lived had taken its current shape, she was warm in the way of people who have paid for their warmth, who have been through something that could have made them cold and have chosen, repeatedly, the harder direction. She was a social worker by profession, which was not a coincidence. She had gone into that field at 28 with a deliberateness that Daniel had attributed to her natural empathy, and, which was also something else, something more specific that she had never explained. She loved Daniel completely. She also had a secret that was not about him and not against him, and which she had been unable to tell him because telling it required saying out loud what had happened, and saying it out loud had not been possible. Not yet. She had not decided to carry it alone forever. She had decided, repeatedly, that the time was not right, and had let the decision compound into something that now felt immovable. The man in room 411 was named Robert Gaines. He was 57 years old. He had a mild heart condition that had been diagnosed 4 years ago, and which was being managed well on a medication regimen that was slightly beyond what his income allowed without assistance. He had a small apartment in the north part of the city, clean and modest, which he had not had to worry about affording for 9 years. He had a daughter named Emma who would have been 21 this February 14th. Emma had died when she was 8 years old. She had been struck by a car on a Thursday evening in March on a residential street 3 blocks from Robert's house while she was riding her bicycle home from a friend's. The driver of the car had been 27 years old. Her name at the time was Claire Simmons. She had been driving within the speed limit. The sun had been low and directly in her eyes. Emma had come between 2 parked cars. The investigation had found no criminal negligence. No charges had been filed. Claire Simmons had attended Emma's funeral, standing at the back where Robert could not see her, and had left before the burial. She had found Robert 6 months later. She had not introduced herself by name. She had gotten a job at the same community center where he sometimes volunteered, and she had spent 4 months in careful proximity before she had said anything at all. She had never told him who she was. She had just quietly, incrementally, become someone whose presence in his life made certain things more possible than they had been before. When she left the city at 32 to take a job in another state, and to begin eventually a life with a man named Daniel Walsh, she had not stopped being present in Robert's life. She had just become present from a different distance. Every year on Emma's birthday, she came back. Daniel had been in room 412 for 2 hours when he heard the door to 411 open and close. He heard Claire's voice, muffled through the wall, but unmistakable in the way that the voices of people you love are unmistakable even at low volume. He heard a man's voice respond. He lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. His phone had 3 texts from Claire. She had sent them throughout the afternoon. The usual ones, checking in, saying she would be home before midnight, asking about dinner. He had replied to all 3 normally. He had been lying in a hotel room next door to wherever she was. While he did this, he got up. He walked to the door between the rooms, an adjoining door, the kind that hotels have for families who book adjacent rooms. Both sides had to be unlocked from each side for it to function. His side was unlocked. He pressed his ear to it, not to hear everything. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for. He heard Claire's voice, clearer now. "How's the breathing been this month?" A man's voice, "Better. The new dosage is helping. Claire, you're taking it consistently, not skipping?" The man, with the mild exasperation of someone used to being monitored. "Yes, Claire." A pause. "Claire, I brought something." A rustling. "I didn't know if you still." The man, "Is that the album?" "Claire, from last year's memorial event. I had it printed properly this time." A longer pause, the sound of pages turning. The man, "This one. Look at this one." Claire's voice changed, softened into something that was past social register entirely. She said, "I know." She looked so happy. Daniel stood at the door with his ear pressed to it and understood, with a certainty that arrived before he had any of the specific information, that he had been wrong about what was happening in that room. He did not know yet what was actually happening. He stepped back from the door. He sat on the edge of the bed. He was going to need to hear more before he understood. He listened for an hour and 40 minutes. He did not hear everything. The wall muffled significant portions, but he heard enough. He heard Claire ask about a medication review scheduled for next month. He heard the man, Robert, she called him Robert, ask about her work, her life, with the specific gentle interest of someone who has known a person for a long time and cares about them in a way that has nothing to do with romantic feeling. He heard at some point around 8 in the evening a shift in the conversation's register. Claire said,
Robert said,
"Okay." A pause. Claire said, "I've been thinking about whether to tell you for a long time, years, and I've decided that not telling you isn't actually protecting you, it's protecting me, and that's not good enough." Another pause. She said, "My name when we met wasn't Claire Walsh, it was Claire Simmons." The quality of the silence on the other side of the wall was different from all the previous silences. Robert said, "Say that again." She said her former name again quietly. Robert said nothing for a very long time. Daniel sat on the bed in room 412 with his hands flat on his knees and understood, in fragments, what he was overhearing. Claire said, "I was the driver. I've known it was my fault in ways the investigation didn't find, and I've carried that for 13 years. I couldn't tell you who I was at the beginning because I was too afraid. And then it was too late and I didn't know how to." Her voice broke on the last phrase. Robert said nothing. The silence lasted long enough that Daniel stood up without deciding to and walked to the adjoining door and stood with his hand on it. Then he heard Robert say, very quietly, "Why are you telling me now?" Claire said, "Because I'm tired of the secret being the thing between us. You've trusted me for 9 years without knowing who I was. That's not something I can keep accepting." Robert said, "Do you want me to forgive you?" Claire said, "No, I don't think I deserve that conversation from you. I just needed you to know the truth." Another long silence. Robert said, "I've known for 4 years. Please, like this video, hit that button, subscribe too, it costs nothing. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? Now let me tell you what Robert knew." The silence after those words was the longest in the evening. Claire said, "What?" Robert said, "I hired someone, a few years after Emma died. To find the driver, I needed to know who it was. He said, I found you. He said, I watched you come into the community center. I watched you find reasons to be near me. I let it happen. Claire said, you knew this whole time. Robert said, I needed to understand something. I needed to understand whether you were what you were, whether this was guilt or whether it was something real. Claire said, Robert, he said, it took me 2 years to decide you were genuine, and by then, he stopped. By then I had decided to accept what you were offering. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that. Just the presence of someone who actually cared whether I was okay. He said, you weren't the only one carrying something. Daniel stood at the adjoining door with his hand on the handle and did not move. He heard Claire cry, the specific quiet crying of someone who has been managing something enormous for a long time and has just had the management lifted from them. He heard Robert say, I don't know what forgiveness is supposed to feel like. I've been trying to find out for 13 years. I haven't arrived yet, Claire said. I know, Robert said, but I don't think I hate you anymore. I haven't for a while. A long pause. I think that might be the most I can honestly offer, he said. Claire said, that's more than I deserve. Robert said, maybe, maybe not. Daniel had been sitting in the chair by the window in room 412 for 20 minutes when he heard the door to 411 open and the sound of Claire in the corridor. He had made a decision in those 20 minutes. He could go back to the lobby. He could be at home when she arrived. He could pretend none of this had happened and live with what he knew privately for as long as he could stand it. Or he could open the door. He opened the door. Claire was standing in the corridor with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder and the specific expression of someone who has just set down a weight they have been carrying for 13 years and is not sure yet what their body feels like without it. She saw him. Every color left her face simultaneously. He said, I booked the room next door. She looked at the door, room 412, and then back at him. He said, I heard most of it. Not everything, but enough. She said his name. He said, come inside. They sat on the 2 chairs by the window of room 412 and Claire told him everything, not summarized, all of it. The accident, the investigation, the funeral she had attended from the back of the room, the job at the community center, the 4 months of careful presence before she said a word to Robert, the 9 years of quiet support that had structured her February 14th every year since. Daniel listened without interrupting. He was good at listening when it mattered. When she finished, she said, say something. He said, why didn't you tell me? She said, because I didn't know how to be the person who told you and be the person you married. At the same time, I was afraid they couldn't exist together. He said, they clearly can. She said, I know that now. He said, 7 years. She said, oh. He said, you've been doing this for 7 years of our marriage without telling me. She said, yes. He was quiet for a moment. He said he doesn't hate you anymore. She said, yes, and you? She looked at him. He said, do you hate yourself anymore, or are you still carrying that? She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, I don't know. I think I've been so focused on what I owe him that I haven't thought about the question the other way. Daniel said, I'd like you to think about it. She looked at him. He said, I'm not angry at you for keeping this. I'm sad that you kept it alone. Those are different things, she said. I didn't want to put it on you. He said, I know. But it was always allowed to be on me. That's what I'm for. She was crying again, the same quiet way she had cried through the wall. He said, I want to meet him. She said, Robert? Yes. She said, why? He said, because he's been in your life for 9 years and I've been in your life for 8. And because I'd like to know the person who decided, after everything, to let you be someone who helped him. The meeting happened 2 days later in a coffee shop. Robert arrived before them and was sitting in a corner booth when they came in. He was a quiet man, not shy, but economical with his presence in the way of people who have been through something large and have learned that presence is a resource to be used intentionally. He looked at Daniel. He said, she told you everything. Daniel said, yes. Robert said, and you're not. He stopped. He was going to say something about anger and changed direction. You're here, Daniel said. She's been carrying this without me for 8 years. I'd like to share it from here. Robert looked at Claire. He said, different from how I imagined him. She said, he usually is. The 3 of them had coffee for 90 minutes. It was not a comfortable conversation. It was not supposed to be. It was an honest one, the specific honest conversation of people who have been connected by the worst possible event and are trying to decide what, if anything, to build from where they are. Robert said, near the end, Emma liked February. She liked the hearts everywhere. She thought it was funny that the whole world made such a fuss about one day, he said. She would have found this whole situation very dramatic. Claire said, she was 8. She would have been fascinated. Robert almost smiled. Almost. It was enough. Daniel had a conversation with Claire 2 weeks after the coffee shop meeting. He said he had been thinking about the foundation. She said, what foundation? He said, something in Emma's name, something that does the kind of work you've been doing informally for 9 years, supporting people who are managing grief alongside financial difficulty, something that makes it structural rather than personal. Claire looked at him. She said that would require telling people. He said, some people, the people who run it, the people it helps. She said, Robert would have to agree. He said, I know, I thought we could ask him together. They asked him together. Robert sat with the idea for a week. He said yes. Not immediately, he asked questions, wanted to understand what it would mean practically, what Emma's name on something would look like and feel like, and whether it would be something he could live with. He said yes. The Emma Gaines Foundation launched 15 months after the February 14th when Daniel had been in room 412. It was not a large organization at its start. 3 staff members, a board of directors that included Robert and Daniel and Claire, and a mandate focused on providing financial support and grief counseling to families who had experienced sudden traumatic loss of a child. The mandate had been written carefully. It did not reference the accident. It did not reference Claire's history with Robert. It was a document about what the foundation intended to do and who it intended to serve. In the first year, it served 31 families. In the second year, 84. By the end of the third year, the foundation's work had reached families in 6 states and had been cited in a national grief support publication as a model for the kind of integrated financial and emotional support that families in that situation most needed. Robert attended the third-year anniversary event. He sat at a table with Daniel and Claire and looked at the photographs of the families the foundation had worked with, not the grief, but the after the grief, the evidence of people who had been given what they needed at the right time and who had found their way through. He said, to no one in particular and to both of them simultaneously, she would have liked this. Daniel said, I think so too. Claire reached across the table and put her hand over Robert's for a moment. He didn't move his hand. It was enough. Daniel and Claire had one more conversation about the 7 years. It happened on a February 14th, their 9th year of marriage, 2 years after the hotel room, sitting in their kitchen in the morning. Claire said, I used to dread this day. Daniel said, I know, she said. I used to feel so relieved when it was over. He said, and now, she thought about it. She said, now I feel like it's just a day, a hard day, but just a day. He'd said, that sounds like something. She said, it is something. They sat with their coffee, the good coffee that she had taught him to make properly, and the morning came through the kitchen window, and it was Valentine's Day, and they were both there. Claire Walsh had been driving a car on a Thursday evening in March, and the sun had been in her eyes, and a little girl had come between 2 parked cars, and nothing was ever the same after that. She had not been criminally negligent. She had also never been able to make herself believe that legal absolution and moral absolution were the same thing. So she had done the only thing she could think of to do. She had found the man whose daughter she had taken, and she had made herself useful to him. And she had done it every year for 13 years in the hope that if she could not undo the damage, she could at least not look away from it. She had not told her husband. She had thought that was protection. It was actually the last boundary she needed someone to help her cross. Here's the question I want you to sit with. Was Daniel right to follow her? He found the truth, and it was not what he feared, but he made the decision to investigate before he knew that. Was he justified? And the harder question, if you had been carrying what Claire was carrying, would you have told your partner? Or would you have done the same thing, found a way to carry it alone rather than put it in someone else's arms? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them all, and please tell me where you're watching from. Please like this video. It means so much for stories like this to find the people who need them. Subscribe if you haven't. It's free and it always will be. Share this with someone. See you in the next one.